So welcome everyone. I'm Carolyn Eswine. I'm co-chair of the Urban Planning Department here at UWM. We're in the School of Architecture and Urban Planning. I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement today. We acknowledge in Milwaukee that we are on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland along the southwest shores of Michigamme, North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. So we always have a couple resources for you, encourage you to take a look at some of the links and expand your knowledge about your connection with your Indigenous communities where you live and work. So welcome to the Department of Urban Planning's Innovative Cities Lecture Series. I want to highlight that our final lecture for the semester will be April 30th. It's going to be the impact of complete streets, highlighting what's worked and what's been implemented in both Milwaukee and Detroit. I'm excited about this because it's not just what should we be planning for, it's actually showing the impact. So we're excited to highlight that as we close it out this semester. Reminder that there will be a survey at the end, and we're always looking for ideas as we put together our speakers for next year. So today I'm really excited to have Jody Amble. She's the Deputy Director of Renew Wisconsin, and Ben Belke, he's the Clean Energy Manager with Renew Wisconsin. And they're going to share some knowledge that they shared with my students last fall. I was really excited to learn how can communities plan to be more sustainable cities, and what are the strategies that they should be looking at in terms of technology, maybe planning grants, and sort of planning for the future. Reminder, you can post your comments and questions through the chat, and we will have time at the end to have a little discussion, answer maybe some of your questions. So welcome, Jody and Ben. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Carolyn. Yeah, Ben and I had such a great time talking to Carolyn's class back in November that we decided to take the show on the road. Yeah, pun intended, right? Ben's going to be talking about clean transportation today. Yeah, renewable energy and clean transportation for sustainable cities. If you go to the next slide, Ben, we'll look at the agenda for today. I'm going to give a basic overview of Renew Wisconsin, what we do, how we approach our work, and some of our top priorities for the year ahead. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ben, and he'll do more of a deep dive into clean transportation, urban sustainability, benefits of electric transportation systems, and then we'll leave some space for questions at the end. Personal introduction. So again, my name is Jody. I'm the Deputy Director at Renew Wisconsin. My background is in the arts and theater and music, but I spent the past 17 years in the marketing and communications space. So I started as a communications director at Renew 8 years ago, and I've been the deputy director for 2 years. This was my first communications job. I had done marketing before that. This is my first time working for a nonprofit, my first time working in the energy space. And what I love most about advocating for clean energy is that there's something for every side of the political spectrum. And ultimately, whether you support clean energy for environmental reasons, health reasons, economic development reasons, different political leanings will have different whys for their support, but the goal is the same: advancing clean energy and clean transportation in your communities. I bring this up because as you look to advance clean energy in your community, just keep in mind that you don't have to have the same why in trying to meet people where they're at and speak to their values in order to build support for the projects and the initiatives you want to move forward. Ben, do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Jody. Yeah, my name is Ben Belke. I'm the Clean Technology Manager at Renew. I recently graduated at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville in December 2022. I studied sustainability and renewable energy systems, and while I was there, I was a city manager intern for the city of Platteville. I did some rooftop solar installation and solar design at Eagle Point Solar out of Dubuque, Iowa. And then after college, I went to work at Land and Liberty Coalition, which worked with communities dealing with large-scale renewable energy development, so large-scale wind and solar, communicating them about the benefits of it, talking about utility aid payments, helping them understand those areas, and then transitioned into this role at Renew, Clean Technology Manager, focusing on building electrification, electric vehicles, and then kind of help the policy team wherever needed, given my background in large scale development. I grew up on a farm as well. I'm currently living on a farm here in Ruley, Wisconsin, which if you haven't heard about it, that's totally fine. You might blink as you drive through it, but it's like 10 minutes north of Platteville. So I have a lot of background within like the rural area and rural experience, which also helps when talking about renewable energy and clean technology to that view as well. So super excited to be here.
Thanks, Ben. So big picture, Renew Wisconsin, we have been advocating for clean energy in Wisconsin since 1991. Our mission is to lead and accelerate the transformation to Wisconsin's renewable energy future through advocacy, education, and collaboration. We work on policies and programs that advance solar power, wind power, renewable fuels, building electrification, energy storage, and electric vehicles in all shapes and sizes, from rooftop solar on homes to ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, to electric school buses, to a wind farm. So we take an all of the above approach to clean energy because we think that's what's needed to decarbonize our economy. Our primary areas of focus in our work is number one would be policy advocacy. So we work in the regulatory and the legislative space. So legislatively, we have a government affairs director who lobbies for clean energy at the Capitol. And if you know anything about Wisconsin politics, you'll know that a bipartisan approach is really important to this work. And I think what sets us apart from other environmental organizations is we think clean energy has value for everyone, and we're focused on growing this chorus of voices, and we're really at the table with everybody, from environmental advocates to utilities even. And then in the regulatory space, we do a lot of engagement at the Public Service Commission. So we intervene on several dockets per year. So we will testify in favor of large-scale solar or wind farms, or we will engage in rate cases that might threaten net metering or other clean energy initiatives for distributed solar. We also run a couple of programs. We have a Solar for Good program that's funded by the Couliard Solar Foundation, which gives solar panel donations to nonprofits that want to put solar on their roofs. And then we administer the City of Madison Solar Group Buy program as well. In addition to that, public education and engagement is huge on our list. That may be, that could look like doing some research and studies on land use for large-scale solar farms, and then developing some web pages and fact sheets to spread that education around. It could mean something like doing this webinar here with you, to educating the general public and clean energy industry on what's happening at the Public Service Commission, why they should care about it, and then helping them engage with the Public Service Commission by submitting comments on the open cases. So I'm just going to highlight a few things that we're focused on this year, and actually some of these we've been focused on for the past several years. But one of them is net metering. In 2023, a couple of Wisconsin utilities proposed to change net metering policies. This was something that was brought up in their rate cases. And the changes would have reduced the financial benefits for customers with solar arrays on their homes or businesses. So if you don't know, net metering is a way to compensate owners of solar arrays for the excess electricity that their solar arrays produce. And it's a huge financial incentive and makes solar make a lot more financial sense for people. So this is why it's important for distributed energy adoption. The proposals were ultimately rejected by the Public Service Commission. And the commission agreed to gather more information in a separate investigatory docket. And so they have worked on a value of solar study, and Renew is waiting now to see what the next actionable steps will be in this investigation. So going to the next slide, how does net metering support sustainable cities, or why should you care about this? Well, net metering encourages renewable energy adoption, so fair compensation for that excess electricity developed by solar panel owners. It incentivizes more households and businesses to invest in solar. Enhances energy equity by ensuring those fair pricing structures, reduces strain on the grid, lowering carbon emissions, boosts local economies through jobs, and then also encouraging energy independence. So cities that generate more of their own electricity reduce their dependence on the centralized power plants, which increases their resilience against power outages and energy price fluctuations. So another big focus of ours is on community solar. And this allows multiple customers to invest and share the benefits of a solar array. So depending on who your utilities is, you may be thinking like, oh, like we already have community solar. Currently, there is community solar in Wisconsin, but they are projects and programs run by utilities. And so when we talk about community solar legislation, is we want to open that up and let communities choose to invest in these projects. This is primarily legislative work right now. So in the last session, Assembly Bill 258 did not pass, but we're actively working on a new bill. We're hoping to get it passed this year. There are several developers. Renew has business members, and there's several developers who work on community solar across the country that are waiting for this legislation in order to do work in Wisconsin. And in addition, there's several Wisconsin companies that are consistently sending their workforce to Minnesota or Illinois, states that have more favorable community solar legislation. And so we're really focused on getting this legislation passed, giving people more access to solar, and then also just keeping this work and these jobs in the state. And one of our major partners here is the Coalition for Community Solar Access. So it's a nationwide coalition, and they advocate for community solar across the country. So how does this support sustainable cities? It expands access to solar energy, allowing residents, businesses, and organizations to subscribe to a shared solar project without installing panels on their own properties. It can make it more accessible to renters, homeowners, homeowners with shaded roofs, and low-income households who might not otherwise be able to afford the solar array. Enhances energy equity by lowering those barriers to participation, reducing carbon emissions, strengthening the grid, boosting local economies again, like local jobs, keeping those jobs in Wisconsin. And it can also support city climate goals. So sustainable cities have ambitious climate targets. Community solar can accelerate their transition to clean energy, so helping cities meet their renewable energy and carbon reduction commitments. So those are two of the major policy initiatives that we're working on. We also have an annual summit. This happens in February every year. It's a clean energy conference that takes place in Madison. This year, we had over 800 attendees. If you are interested in connecting with Wisconsin's clean energy businesses or advocates or local government leaders, this is the place to be. So I put the save the date for next year, February 5th, 2026. I hope you can join us. And if you are interested in what the programming was like for this summit, if you go to renewwisconsin.org, we have audio of all of our breakout sessions and video of the plenary sessions, so you can see the speakers and programming that was there. In addition, we have communications campaigns that we run throughout the state. This past fall, we had a rural gratitude campaign that was thanking rural communities for fueling Wisconsin's clean energy transition. There was a petition and statewide print and digital ads. We asked people to sign on to the letter. We're currently working on a community benefits campaign that will look at specific large-scale projects across the state, and specifically the utility aid payments that are going to counties and municipalities, and how these projects and these payments have improved quality of life for rural communities by increasing their local government budget. So we're really trying to dig into how these budgets have increased, and if we can, figuring out where that money went so we can make these benefits a little more tangible to the communities that these projects are in. And the last thing that I will highlight is Renew is one of the first members of the Clean Economy Coalition of Wisconsin. It's a group of 50+ climate, energy, environmental justice, conservation organizations and businesses, all working to build a clean economy in Wisconsin and advocating for clean energy solutions. One of the major campaigns right now is the Power Wisconsin Forward campaign, which is advocating against two methane gas plants that We Energies is proposing. We do imagine more utilities are going to be proposing gas plants going forward. So this campaign is set up to speak against fossil fuels and to encourage more renewable energy and clean energy solutions as we transition. I will pass it now to Ben, and he will do a deep dive into transportation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jody. So we're going to start my side of the presentation with one of my favorite visuals on this in this conversation, which is looking at the energy in versus energy out. So this is published by the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. supposed to be every year. We've been waiting since 2019. There hasn't been one out since, but this still gives a pretty accurate picture of what we're talking about today. So on the left is all the inputs into energy, whether you're talking about electrons being energy or whether you're talking about petroleum products being energy. And at the bottom, we're talking about petroleum. So in the state of Wisconsin, we bring in about $9.6 billion in petroleum products. And then on the far right, you have the light gray and then the dark gray. Light gray is rejected energy. This is all energy that's just naturally lost in the system, whether it's through heat or inefficiencies. And then the darker gray is the actual energy that we are using at the time. So as you can see, just because of natural inefficiencies of the transportation sector, being because of internal combustion engines mainly at this point, we lose about $8.1 billion just naturally through the inefficiencies of an internal combustion engine. Switch this over to electric vehicles. Electric vehicles currently convert about 60% of the electrical energy from the grid to actually powering the wheels forward. This is compared to about 20% for electric vehicles. So even in the current grid that we have right now, which is a heavily carbonized grid, you can still see that we would still be having a more efficient usage of the energy that we're actually using if we're switching to electric vehicles. In fact, EVs are about 2.6 to 4.8 times more efficient in traveling a mile. And another point of this, and really why Renew is interested in this overall picture of electrification, whether it's solar and wind or hydro or EVs and heat pumps and building electrification in general, it's because Wisconsin sends about 12 to 14 billion dollars outside the state each year to import fossil fuels, whether you're talking about natural gas, petroleum products, coal, all these things we have to import from outside the state of Wisconsin. Switch that to a lot of things that we do have abundance of in Wisconsin. We have sun, we have wind, we have land, we have roofs, we have people who are willing to invest in our state, as Jody has mentioned before. All these things allow us to have a real conversation about how much of those dollars can we switch to having homegrown renewable energy that we can have at our local economies, support local jobs, support domestic manufacturing. This is really why Renew is interested in this all above approach or this real conversation about what makes sense and how we can transition over to having more of those dollars being brought in to a state like Wisconsin. And before we start talking about the overall EVs in kind of an urban setting, I really want to set the framework of EVs in these different sectors of Wisconsin. So rural areas, suburban areas, and urban areas, just kind of set the framework of where each one of these locations is kind of dealing with and where they're coming from. So first off, when I talk to a lot of people from rural areas, a lot of my neighbors, the big thing that gets brought up is about energy independence. That's a really, really, really important thing and a really important conversation here about the United States imports the majority of our crude oil, and as well as 87% of Republicans, they currently see renewable energy as part of the fuel mix with fossil fuels and renewable energy. And even though I wish renewable energy was seen as could be a primary driver in this area, I think it's important to recognize that the majority of people in the United States see renewable energy as an important role here as we consider energy independence, consider what we want to do domestically here. It's an important conversation to have and something that renewable energy can really drive that conversation and talk about national security, talk about energy independence, talk about bringing more of those jobs like we just talked about into the state of Wisconsin. But one of the areas that they're going to kind of have a struggle with in rural areas is talking about the charging. When I worked at Eagle Point Solar, we had a lot of people in Dubuque, Iowa, which has a very similar grid to southwest Wisconsin. But in Dubuque, Iowa, there's a lot of people who wanted solar on their homes. They just couldn't get it because the electric utility didn't have enough export capacity or didn't have enough capacity on that localized grid to accept energy going back the other way. And this is very similar what we're going to be seeing with electric vehicles, making sure there is enough electricity capacity, but making sure that the lines are upgraded to actually even allow electric vehicles to happen on these locations. As well as a lot of places are still working on 100 amp service as opposed to the 200 amp that is needed for a level 2 charger. So that's something to be talked about within rural areas, as well as three-phase energy is what's needed for DC3 fast charging. So DC3 fast charging is the charging that you're hearing about primarily right now going on interstates. It's the one that charges vehicles the fastest, like 20 to 40 minutes, depending on the vehicle. And the problem is with this is that you need three-phase energy, which isn't usually a problem for suburban and rural areas or suburban and urban areas. But in rural areas, there's a lot of communities that don't even have three-phase running through their community. And the ones that do, they're often in kind of the outskirts of the community. And that kind of leads me to my next one, which is the communities that do have the energy or the capability in these locations do have a potential with this these charging infrastructures to actually drive some economic development, right? Thinking about if we place these near local communities or placing these near local businesses that we want to see thrive, that's naturally driving people into the community as opposed to what we see right now where you're driving along 151, you're driving along 94, you stop at a Quick Trip Quick and you don't even enter the community, right? There's a conversation to have there about potentially bringing people into those local areas for an economic boost. And then another issue, topic to have is about tradition, right? 19% of registered vehicles right now in Wisconsin are trucks, and the majority of these are in rural areas. Travel distance, they're longer. It's longer to get to work. It's longer to get to sporting events. It's longer to get to the shopping locations. So that requires EVs with greater range. And because of that plays into a role of how much money you're willing to put into electric vehicle, since the more range, generally the more expensive the vehicle is. But then there's also this tradition of self-sufficiency. And in my mind, there's nothing more self-sufficient than somebody who lives on a farm, who has a solar array, who has a heat pump that they don't have to rely on the propane market. They have a battery backup, so they don't have to worry about when electricity runs out or electricity, stops working for whatever reason. All these things I think play into this self-sufficiency, being able to harness this energy yourself and utilize it yourself on your own farm or in your own business or in your own community. And we see a lot of areas really taking advantage of this. Actually, there was just a microgrid that was built by Alliant Energy in southwestern Wisconsin for the community because they're at the tail end of the energy service. And because of that, they tend to have longer blackouts than some of the other communities. And they've been taking a lot of advantage of having 4 to 8 extra hours to have energy usage if there is a blackout that they occur. Suburban Wisconsin, this is an area where I think if you were to snap your fingers and switch everything over to EVs, they would have the easiest time switching over. First of all, commutes, they're within 16 miles either way, well within even plug-in hybrid ranges, and certainly within battery electric vehicle ranges. Shorter distance commutes, they have the most benefit when talking about electric vehicles. Charging, they already have adequate car storage, which we call garages, obviously, and electric needs. They already are running 200 amp generally. They already have the ability to take on 240 volts. Off-peak charging in general is your greatest return on investment for an electric vehicle. That's a lot easier when you do have a garage to store that vehicle. And a lot of those areas already have three-phase running into their business hubs. And because of that, they can already take on DC3 fast charging readily. And then when you're talking about urban sprawl in general, when we're talking about new builds and new growth, a lot of these places can already take up new EVs, take up new clean technology. One of the earliest ways to integrate electric and clean technology is when you're in the process of building your house, right? Planning where that battery is going to go, planning where the electric vehicle is going to go, already preparing your panel to take on electric vehicle and solar and battery storage. It's the earliest that you can do it is when you're building the house. And urban sprawl allows that to, as we're building these new houses, maybe potentially planning into it that they have to have a 240 volt running to the garage, or planning that they have to have electric panel that's already adapted to taking on extra battery and solar storage. So that's a very important thing here. And as well as suburban families, they traditionally have more disposable income, which helps with those higher upfront costs that a lot of clean technology does have with it. And then urban Wisconsin, there's a few trade-offs here. One, a lot of multifamily homes, they have limited parking places, limited parking passes. Because of this, there might not be enough areas where they can actually even access a charger at their home. High upfront cost of electric vehicles is a huge commitment there. But again, talking about shorter distances, the shorter the distance, the more benefit you can get from an electric vehicle. Charging, multifamily home charging, especially in Wisconsin, becomes difficult when talking about the new EV law, which we'll get to, talking about who ends up paying for that charger, who pays for the electricity running through that charger, which leads into talking about public charging costs. If you're relying on public charging, you're naturally paying a premium for that energy more so than somebody who's charging at their home. So your return on investment, it grows over a longer range. And then, but the one thing about charging in urban areas is that there is already electric infrastructure in a lot of these areas to take on the necessary additional charging that is needed for a mass overhaul of, say, the transportation sector. And then when you're talking about public transportation, this allows for a lot more people to, say, contribute to an electrification, right? As people are paying their bus fares, as people are paying for their electric taxis, they're contributing to that electric adoption automatically. And as well as when you're talking about fleets, say for road work fleets, or whether you're talking about USPS or Amazon, having known routes and having routes that are already surrounded by chargers at, say, the grocery stores or places where people are going to eat, it already makes sense to switch over those fleets to electric vehicles, saving that long-term cost there. And we're also having this conversation besides just cost, but also talking about cleaner air, cleaner communities, right? This is reducing particulate matters in the air, particulate matter in the air. This is reducing nitrous oxide. All these things linked to respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular disease, premature deaths. And cleaner air just reduces the amount of energy room visits that people are having to take. And then this is particularly important when you're talking about children and seniors in these communities. And naturally, fewer sick days just means a better community in general, right? Electrification of the transportation can prevent thousands of lost work days annually. And this is really important when talking about the infrastructure and people going to work and making sure that the community is continuing to run. In fact, a case study by the American Lung Association found that electrifying a fleet in just a medium-sized community reduces missed work days by 25,000 extra work days. So 25,000 times 8 for eight hours a day times 15, say $15 an hour, you're saving about $3 million just in lost work days there. So that's a really important thing. And that's just talking about a medium-sized city. And then when you're talking about less people being sick, less people having to go to these emergency rooms, that's taking a lot of the burden off the local healthcare and reducing costs there, right? Right now we talk about shortage of nurses and doctors and hospitals being overrun or having a lot of expenses going to local hospitals. So being able to cut down on the amount of people that are actually going in and seeking care is a very important to eliminating a lot of those issues. It's a lot of this when I'm talking about electrification and renewable energy is talking about the domino effects, right? You clean up the air because of that. People are getting less sick because of that. There's less strain on the healthcare systems. There's less strain on people taking days off work. So that's a big conversation to have in talking about the overall electrification of communities. And it's kind of talking more about kind of what the community itself can do and talking about the public transportation side. So the stuff that they might potentially own. So electric buses, they have zero tailpipe emissions from wheel to well, which is from the battery to the wheel itself. And this helps with localized climate change or localized pollutants, right? Just eliminating one diesel vehicle can eliminate up to 135 metric tons of CO2 annually. That's equivalent to 28 passenger vehicles off the road. And you're talking about larger bus fleets, even like in a community like Platteville, we had 5 bus lines. That's a lot of passenger roads off that's helping with that localized air pollution and helping people with that. And cost savings alone. Sure, it has a higher upfront cost, but you're saving in those fuel costs. You're being more efficient on the road, and as well as reducing maintenance costs, which is a really big expense for a lot of communities, right? Saving maintenance expenses by up to 30% is really big when you're talking about the budgets that people are having to deal with right now. And as well as accessibility improvements. Electric buses, they're quieter, they have smoother rides, This is especially important for those riders who have disabilities or mobility challenges. And then it's also important when talking about these electric buses and possibly planning out electric bus routes to make sure that they are used by the overall community and making sure they are going to places that can potentially benefit the most from having less air pollution from what would be the diesel bus going through that community, instead having an electric bus go there instead. Now let's talk about what communities can potentially do for the passenger side of things. So what they can do with the actual electric infrastructure. So again, we're having this conversation because electric vehicles are just naturally more efficient than gasoline powered cars. Again, exactly like the electric buses, they have zero tailpipe emissions that happen. All these contribute to helping with climate change and health concerns around the community. But a very interesting thing is actually planning out where these EVs can go. And I think this is a unique conversation that can happen in potentially work groups if it's not already happening, helping in the planning committees potentially of different communities, of talking about if we are planning about electrifying, or we are planning about implementing more electric vehicle chargers, where do we want to put them? So there have been studies shown, and this was an early on study in California that showed that it did increase nearby business revenue by 1.4%. And this was an early on study. There wasn't as many electric vehicles on the road, even in California at the time of this study. But it does show that there is a clear growth in implementing electric vehicles in one location and boosting the revenue. So strategically placing these, I know a lot of businesses have been growing in their different districts, building in different TIFs, building in different areas, and it might make sense where you're strategically placing, we want to grow this economic area. Maybe we put a few different chargers in this location as opposed to a different location, or maybe we want to boost a lot more economic development in this one location that we just built shops in, or we want to have more foot traffic in here, or more tourism. That's a unique conversation that you can have in these early planning phases, even before you're putting one electric vehicle charger in the ground, is where do we want to put this public infrastructure? Naturally, electric vehicles, right, you charge them for between 20 to 40 minutes. In that time, they're going to want to go to on-site amenities. They're going to want to go buy and eat refreshments. They're going to want to go to local stores. So it's just this natural mix of the two, where it's no longer you're going to put a gas station, it's no longer people necessarily need to go to the gas station on the outskirts of the community. They can come within the community and utilize the amenities there while they're already fueling up for their next ride or going on to the next stop. But in all this, it's important to understand the community's ability in helping different residents, the actual residents of the community, help with a lot of the EV barriers. One of them is, again, multifamily housing barriers. We already talked about the return on investment. It's hurt a little bit when talking about having to use public charging. However, just having public charging there is really important. People can still utilize the public charging very similar to that they would of of their traditional gas stations, fueling up before they go home. That's certainly well within the cards. You're certainly still going to be saving more on that vehicle than you would of an internal combustion engine. And then just expanding to any sort of public charging infrastructure if the community has the ability to. And then this is one area where I really want to talk about, especially in a state like Wisconsin, about hard to decarbonize transportation systems, right? We have a large network of regional airports. We have a large network of ports that take a lot of international trade in and out of. And this is an area where it's a hard area to decarbonize. And why is that? Well, long distances, airplanes, cargo ships, they have to go over long ranges, and they require a long range solution. Right now, battery technology is not there, right? The more energy you need, the heavier that battery gets. And when you're talking about something like an airplane and a boat, those weights really play a big factor in that. So right now, that technology is not there. And as well as infrequent upgrades. When you're talking about ports, airports, different actual shipping vessels, right? A lot of these have long lifespans, and that delays the full electrification transition, right? Say that a port in Milwaukee wanted to completely electrify that port and wanted shipping containers to go there that only had battery technology or only had hydrogen fuel going into them. Well, what happens if that same shipping container now has to go to a place in New Orleans or has to go to a place in the Mediterranean where they might not have the same goals or they might not have the same decarbonization at that port? That becomes a little bit harder to justify switching those upgrades. But there is a solution, and one of those solutions is biofuels. So biofuels is considered a drop-in fuel. This means it can work with everyday, already works within current jet fuel engines, and it already works within current shipping container vessels as well. And it already works in there. And that means that the infrastructure is already ready. We can already start, instead of having a tank that's filled with diesel, you can have a tank filled with biodiesel. Instead of having a jet engine tank filled with uh, petroleum-based kerosene, you can have it with biofuels-based kerosene. All these things are already available, already set up to take on. You don't need to have a new hydrogen tank being put in. You don't need to have a huge electric grid and enhancement in these locations. You can already start having these drop-in fuels ready to go. And this also means that if you have, say, a port like Milwaukee who wants to start investing in biofuels, and that same shipping container then goes to that New Orleans port or goes to that port in the Mediterranean Sea. Well, that's fine. They can still use that fuel that exists there. They don't need to have a huge retrofit in order to meet those goals. So it's nice because you can have this decoupleized carbonization, right? You're not forcing these other areas to meet your goals. You're able to meet your personal goals and hopefully push those other areas in that direction. But it's not forced. It's not. People are able to achieve those goals at the time that makes sense for them in their community. And obviously, you might be like, "Oh, that seems too good to be true." What's the catch? The catch is that there are certainly challenges. One of them is high cost. Right now, biofuels, they still are more expensive than traditional fossil fuels. This hurts the widespread adoption of them. And then production capacity. Right now, Wisconsin doesn't have the production capacity, and other states are lagging behind as well. But one state I like to point out is Iowa. Iowa actually has a production tax credit for the production of biofuels. And they actually have a really growing industry there of biofuels. And I think it's funny because even though Iowa has the connection there between, it does have rivers on either side of it, it also does not have necessarily the ports the same way that a state like Wisconsin does. And I think Wisconsin can be really the leader in the United States for talking about biofuels, right? We have the farms already available. We have farmers who are looking to diversify their income. That's why solar and wind are so prevalent right now, because people are willing to lease their land to these technologies in order to have a diversified income. But they can diversify it in other ways, like biofuels. We can talk about ethanol being used in these other locations. We can talk about because of that, a lot of these regional airports, they are also really important to farming, right? When you're talking about crop dusting and things like this, they can be utilizing this biofuels. We already have a lot of people who are willing to invest in biofuels. We have the southeastern part of Wisconsin that's really grown in manufacturing. They might be able to take on an extra manufacturing of biodiesel. There's a lot of ethanol plants that can be easily converted into biodiesel and biofuels plants. We have ports of entry for international trade already here in the state of Wisconsin. So I think Wisconsin, more so than a state like Iowa, or more so like other states who do have these biofuel credits, might be able to take even more advantage and really be a leader in biofuels here in this state and really utilize all the great things we have going on here. And then we'll quickly talk about the different policies. I know a lot of this is changing, potentially even as we speak, who knows? But for the time being, the Inflation Reduction Act, that's still there. There's still a lot of bipartisan support for it. This provides long-term funding. It's accelerating this transition to clean energy, setting different goals. It incentivizes EVs, it incentivizes biofuels, it incentivizes clean infrastructure in different ways. It has that direct pay, so governments themselves can actually take advantage of the IRA funding. There's EV tax credits, not only for new purchases, but the one I love the most, which is $4,000 for used EVs. This is important for driving down that price and opening up the EV market to a lot of new buyers who potentially wouldn't be considering a new EV. And then there's an alternative fuel infrastructure tax credit This works with EV chargers, also biofuels as well, 30% of the cost. Again, public and private can take advantage of these incentives. And then the bipartisan infrastructure law, this was going into NEVI. Right now in Wisconsin, 33 of the chargers are for sure a go. They're all signed in. They're all going into those alternative fuel corridors. And the other ones, they're still kind of up in the air, but more than likely are going to be seen through. And then $5 billion to Clean School Bus program. This is one of the programs that I really focus on a lot in my work, working with communities and seeing how they can implement electric school buses and where it makes sense. If the district themselves owns it, if the city themselves owns it, working on those different partnerships to see where it makes sense to who owns it, what routes that make the most sense. But that's funding that's within that as well. And then we had recent state policy changes last year, and we're soon to have probably another policy change, which I'll touch on here very shortly. But just so we all know what the EV current state policy is here, we switched it from being charged by the hour, which you couldn't charge by the kilowatt hour in Wisconsin. Only utilities could technically charge energy by the kilowatt hour. This bill changed it so that EVs and EV chargers can charge by the kilowatt hour now instead of by the hour. And why this is important is actually the picture that you see right here on this slide. You have an EV Bolt versus a Mustang Mach-E. Mustang Mach-E can charge at a faster rate than the EV Bolt. Because of that, the EV Bolt owner would actually technically be paying more for that energy if they were charging on a per hour or a time usage, just because their vehicle doesn't charge as fast. As you can see, there's a real equity issue here as well, considering the types of vehicles that people may or may not be able to afford at the time. Because of being able to charge by the kilowatt hour, this gets it closer to like gasoline, where when I go to this place, it's $3.20. So that's where it is, no matter what, no matter how fast my vehicle's filling up. So it's standardizing it. They're increasing workforce development, which I think is really exciting, making sure that the EVs are always, that there's a high uptime of the reliability of them. And it's giving clarity on different things. So there is a tax now. There's a 3-cent kilowatt hour tax on all public chargers, whether the energy is being sold or not. There is going to be a 3-cent tax. Whoever owns that charger is the one to pay it. And then as well as there's still a $175 EV registration fee that people have probably already seen if you own a hybrid potentially. And then at the residential level, level 1 and level 2 chargers, it's clear that those are exempt. They don't have to pay those EV, they don't have to pay the 3-cent tax, only those that are publicly available. And if you have any questions on that, honestly, if you want to email me, we have a little bit more direction from the excuse me, the Department of Revenue about this information. They have some clarifying information out there about it, because it does get kind of confusing when you're talking about governments and fleets and what governments can and can't do. And a lot of that is very individualized to that community or to that situation. So if you have any concerns, feel free to reach out to me. If not, DOR is a really, really great resource. They've always been really good at getting back to us and getting back to our members. So more than happy to be a resource there. And then other local policies that people can implement. What are some things that can potentially be implemented in these different communities? One of them is talking about doing a comprehensive review of the electric vehicle fleet. So we did this at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville, saw where it made sense and when to transition this fleet over. How many EVs should we have? How many plug-in hybrids should we have? What does it actually look like? Just seeing what it looks like on pen and paper is important. Setting goals and timelines for the electrification fleet to reduce emissions and operating costs. And then one thing that's becoming really, really popular, especially right now when talking about government efficiency and talking about saving money, a really interesting policy is total cost of ownership. And basically what this is showing is that instead of just taking the price of say a vehicle as what they have to do when a government has to purchase one, is taking the total cost of that ownership. So over the full life of that vehicle that the government plans on owning it, which one actually makes more financial sense. And a lot of times the EV is the one that makes the most financial sense for that government body. And this is really great. A lot of these bills have actually been passed by Republican legislators and signed into law by Republican governors. So this is a very interesting area, especially right now, talking about what's being talked about right now, government efficiency and saving money here and there. I think this is a really an interesting area where it opens up potentially more EV if the total cost of ownership makes sense for that community. Governmental infrastructure changes, again, pointing out those key tourist locations where you want to attract visitors to, expanding the charging in just local areas, local parks, local transit hubs, making sure that you're promoting electric vehicle accessibility, and then increasing incentives for clean transportation manufacturing, whether that's providing different tax credits or grants to local EV production, batteries, assembly, and just supporting the workforce of people who are taking part in clean energy. And there's a few case studies, and I'll go through these quickly. One of them is Racine. They transitioned their bus fleet over to electric buses. They've been able to improve the air quality. A lot of the drivers, they say, love driving the buses. They've saved on a lot of fuel costs, more than $170,000 in fuel costs and maintenance throughout their whole lives. And it's always great when you're able to see case studies like this. Another case study is Dane County and then the city of Milwaukee. Both of them submitted for a CFI grant. Both of them were able to get it. All of these are introducing new chargers into those communities. This is complementary to the NEVI funds. This is different than those NEVI funds. So this will be additional chargers on the grid for those. The goal of these is low to moderate income communities, multifamily housing. And this was a really great example of collaboration. So we had a lot of clean energy advocates, a lot of people from that clean economy coalition, utilities, local governments, Renew being included in the clean energy advocates, working together on these grants to help push it forward and submit comments and submit things in favor. And Wisconsin actually, through this grant process, received the most funding out of the states and received 2 of them at nearly the total capacity, which was 15 million at the time. So it was really great to see and really great to showcase that collaboration in this space is so important to achieving a lot of these goals. And then how do you want how to stay involved within Renew and what we do? One of the biggest ways is to join as a member, whether that's you and your community. So governments can actually become a member of Renew for free. But then you yourself as an individual can also become a member of Renew, staying updated with our newsletter, getting updates on clean energy news. We have a blog that stays up to date. So if you want information on EVs and building electrification and cool microgrid technologies and new advancements going on, I always have my blog running of those interesting things. And there's blogs going on all the time about different government laws that change, different regulatory stuff that we're working on, for example, like net metering right now. Attend different events. We have a Green Revolution of Women. I don't know, Jody, if you want to talk more about GROW and what that all has to do with, but then also attending Renew's workshops, webinars, networking events. Those are all really great ways to kind of be in a like-minded of peers. And then also being a Renew member, you can explore the job board, access different job opportunities within the clean energy market. And then just really have a good connection there. We have a community portal where people can communicate across. It's very similar to like social media, or very, very collaborative, very engaged of communicating amongst each other about issues or potential stories that are going on. So it's a really great environment there on the members portal. So. And other than that, we are good for any questions.
All right, thank you so much. I think this is a great deeper dive. I think whether it's somebody's first time thinking about this or they already have engaged with it in their community, it's providing a lot of new, I think, numbers and statistics to think about, but also some of the more reliable information. So we do have a couple questions. I think one, which is an interesting question, is they're called public charging infrastructure. The question is, does that mean taxpayers are paying for the EV charging stations, which is different than, not paying for gas stations now?
That's fair. And yes, that would be. So It's kind of interesting. So governments themselves in the state of Wisconsin actually can't own the chargers themselves. They would have to work through, for example, like a Quick Trip or like Electrify America, to have the chargers there. And basically, it'd be like either leasing that land to them, that specific area, that small area there, or it would be working with them so that they can actually implement their chargers there. So there is a lot of interest already from the private sector to get chargers in these locations. So a lot of times people would be willing to put their private money into it and not have to have taxpayers pay into it. But if it is completely taxpayer funded for that, technically yes. But again, because of the state law, at least in Wisconsin specifically, a lot of these are becoming private public partnerships where there's a lease between the city and then that private owner of that charger.
Okay, so that's fair. So do you know what percentage of total vehicles registered in Wisconsin are EVs? That's another question, but I'm curious.
Oh, I have not looked recently.
I think
I
it's
think
about 27, like between 25 and 30,000. I think
yes.
that's the last
Okay.
number I saw.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So probably a low percentage, but is the number increasing? Are you seeing it
It
increase in
is.
the last
Yep.
couple of years? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So there's a little bit more demand. So there's a question probably a little bit more on the EV specific. This person is talking about getting pushback about EVs only solving tailpipe pollution. And do you agree with that, or what are some other responses that they might have for those comments?
Yeah, and that's a fair point. But another thing is, when you're talking about petroleum versus on the grid, petroleum is always going to be producing the amount of emissions it does, right? There's not a cleaner form of petroleum necessarily. EVs, every time we put on a new solar array, every time there's battery storage connected to solar, every time there's a new wind farm that hits the grid, that electron, that energy that's running into that battery is naturally becoming cleaner. So that's the positives of this is if you look at the full picture, well, yes, it is only at the tailpipe emissions, which is important for localized air pollution. At the full scale, the more we continue to add renewable energy, which continues to happen, I do want to add that there's the most amount of solar and wind construction cases at the PSC that they have had at a consistent time, and so they're continuing to happen. And every time we get one of those on, the cleaner that energy going into that vehicle gets, and the less emissions overall it contributes to.
I will say too, that even though EVs do have a high initial carbon footprint, but even in a state like Wisconsin, where we're primarily fossil fuels like coal and natural gas, even then an EV has a lower carbon footprint over its lifespan.
Yeah.
So and like Ben said, it keeps getting cleaner and it's getting better. But even with the coal and natural gas, it still has a better environmental impact.
Okay, that's helpful. So there's a bigger question, I think, about your advocacy. I think you touched a little bit on what you do and don't do in the beginning, Jody, but the question is, is there an opportunity to expand public transportation systems in Wisconsin? As we know, there's a discussion of a regional transit authority. Is that something that your organization is part of, or how might you engage?
I can talk about this too. So yeah, at the Clean Economy Coalition, we've really been talking about in that electrification group about regional transit authorities. I think it was within the governor's budget, or there was mention of it. But yeah, that's something that has been talked about there, and something that we have been pushing as a group. We haven't necessarily gone full in necessarily at Renew of being 100% like talking about that all the time. But we certainly are in favor of it, and certainly working with those groups to help with the full coalition of getting something like that work done in Wisconsin.
Well, obviously, as we know, it's very polarized conversation at times. And
Yeah.
I appreciated the comment in the beginning. There's some communities focus on this from a different perspective, depending on their policies and their constituents. But Dan has a question. I think I asked you this last November. About the manufacturers for the electric buses. I know Racina's been really, really successful. Milwaukee was successful, but then went back to hybrid. They were having a lot of challenges with their electric buses. So I don't know if you have any comment on, like, will there be more options in the future? And what is the reliability
Yeah.
long term?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Line C, the one of the big electric bus companies, they closed down their plant. Excuse me, closed down their plant, and I think might even be close to being bankrupt. And a lot of that was them specific, I feel, but yeah, that's certainly something that we are definitely paying attention to. I think there's always going to be a market for those. It might get a little slower here because of the electric school bus funding kind of being up in the air at the moment. But as long as there's interest, as long as communities are looking at saving that money, as long as people are interested in that, there's always going to be people there who are willing to have a bus available. And I'm still keeping tabs on how Racine's doing and how different communities are doing with their buses. And if it doesn't make sense for communities, like I always say, if you're even considering it, it's important to go through an audit process and see if it even makes sense for your community. If it doesn't make sense, you know, obviously don't go through with it. Don't purchase those buses if it doesn't make sense or if it doesn't make financial sense for your community. But it's important to kind of go through that first step of just questioning it and then potentially going through an audit process, whether that's a third party audit or whether that's just you personally writing out the numbers and seeing what makes sense. I think both activities are important just to see what makes sense for your community at that specific time.
Okay. I think the other challenges, which could be a whole nother discussion, is, it sounds good at first, but then when those companies aren't doing well, that's creating its own challenges. There were another question just about other maybe side effects or unintended consequences, right? For EVs, their comment was about wearing the brakes and tires at a faster rate. Is there science on that? And
yeah, they're brakes less so because a lot of it is regenerative. But yes, you do wear the tires more, but you're still saving more money on maintenance costs because you don't have pistons, you don't have spark plugs, you don't have oil, you don't have those type of maintenance things that you have to worry about. But yes, tires do wear about 20 to 30% faster on an electric vehicle. And then brakes, it depends on how regenerative you want your braking to be, right? If you have heavy regenerative braking, you're not really putting a lot of strain on your brake. But if you put it all the way down to zero, which some people do because they might not like that regenerative braking feel, then you're wearing them more because that electric vehicle weighs more than a traditional internal combustion engine.
I think there's always pros and cons. So for those who are still on, you can see Blythe put the survey in the chat. So please fill that out. Reminder that our next and last one for the semester is April 30th. We're going to be looking at complete streets. And so I'll just close with one more question that I'm seeing here. It's probably more of a policy question about the EVs. Some EV stations are based on mobile platforms with solar panels. So is there any impact by the state law for municipalities owning these mobile stations, charging stations?
Yeah, if it's open to the public, yes. Although if it was a level 2 and it was before, it's a date in March. Forgive me for not remembering, but whoever had that question, feel free to email me. Before that law was passed in I think last March. Anything before that is grandfathered in. But if it was something it's after or something that people are thinking about getting now, yes, it would be impacted by solar powering a EV because the law basically states that energy has to be coming from the utility.
Okay, all right. And it looks like somebody's looking for work. So I don't know if you're seeing the last comment here. Where can an EVS SE technician work? So if they're certified.
Yeah, they can work whether it's in a community, like looking at doing manufacturing work. They can, or not manufacturing, but maintenance work. They can work at different, I know a lot of dealerships have been really interested in getting more EV work, especially in like Madison and Milwaukee. They're always looking for new technicians who understand energy, right? Because it's just naturally different than internal combustion. You're working with higher power energy running through those lines. So it takes a special person, and yeah, those are the type of places you can do.
never know what connections we'll be creating. So I don't know,
Absolutely.
Jody, did you have any final comments? Because we really appreciate just spending another minute or so.
Yeah, no, I was gonna add something to the EV charging stations, and it's kind of a question for Ben, just to clarify. I think municipalities can have the charging stations, they just can't sell the electricity,
Right.
correct, under the current law? So
Yep.
they could invest in it and do it, but also the solar panels thing, I think we've done some studies before that the amount of battery storage you would need to keep those charging stations up and running with solar is so extensive that usually, even if solar panels are helping to feed the electricity, they're typically still grid tied, and so they're pulling from the grid when the sun isn't shining.
Okay, well, very informative. I really appreciate you both spending some time with us. And for those of you still on, we really appreciate you joining this conversation and learning a little bit more. I know we've come a long way in the last 10 years, and it'll be kind of fun to have this conversation another 10 years to see where we're at. So thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you April 30th at the next ICL.